Welcome to the Nursing Post podcast, All Nursing All the Time, with Ashley Moore and Rosa Horsley. In this episode, we discuss the benefits of breastfeeding, along with how breastfeeding shame has become a thing. Our goal is always to inform and start conversation.
We know that there are many benefits to breastfeeding, and of course we're going to discuss those today. But what happens if you choose not to breastfeed, or if you're unable to breastfeed your newborn baby? A couple of statistics. There are 84.1% of infants who are breastfed, and at 6 months, that number drops to 58.3%. And at a year, that number drops to 35.3%. And the percentage of breastfed infants supplemented with formula before 2 days of age was 19.2% in 2017. And this increased from 16.9% in 2016. And I did read a nice article where some women have trouble with producing enough milk to feed their newborn child. Very difficult for some people who are type A, because you really don't know how much they're getting.
Yes.
You can't measure it because they're literally taking it from you. But that some children were supplemented with about 10 mLs of formula after breastfeeding. So the child would breastfeed and then get 10 mLs of formula.
Yeah.
And that those children were 4 times less likely to be hospitalized.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
It is. And mainly a lot of the hospitalizations were due to GI problems. And I'll have to link that study in our show notes. But it was interesting to see that, and how sometimes you need both.
The benefits of breastfeeding, we've all heard it. If you're a mom, you've heard it from the day you were pregnant.
Breast is best.
Breast is best. That's what they say. So, of course, we're going to list the benefits of breastfeeding because they exist. They are true. They are real.
Yes.
Breast milk provides ideal nutrition for babies. It saves time and it saves money. Breast milk contains important antibodies. So the mom's antibodies are being passed to the baby when the baby's breastfeeding. Breastfeeding may make your children smarter. A study has shown that breastfed babies have higher intelligence scores and are less likely to develop behavioral problems and or learning difficulties as they grow. Breast milk promotes babies' healthy weight. It also helps the uterus contract, which if you're a mother, that's exactly what you want. You want to snatch that shape that you once had back.
Right.
Breastfeeding does that. It also may prevent menstruation. Once again, if you're a lady and you have that monthly visitor, this is a way to kind of avoid her.
Right.
It helps you lose weight because you're actually burning calories. Baby's taking calories from you, which helps you lose weight. And breastfeeding reduces the risk of disease. So it's reducing your chance of high blood pressure, arthritis, high blood fats, heart disease, even type 2 diabetes. And mothers who breastfeed have a lower risk for depression.
Now, I think, are told from the beginning of our pregnancy the benefits of breastfeeding.
Absolutely. Since day one.
I know it was something that was talked about almost at every visit with both of my children. And I was at 2 separate different facilities when I had my children, 2 separate cities. But there are reasons that women may choose not to breastfeed. And I wanted to kind of go over the top reasons. There was a study that I found that had these listed. The number one reason is not liking breastfeeding. They just don't want to do it. Going to work or school was another reason women chose not to breastfeed. Having to care for other children. They felt that there were too many other things to do within the home to have to breastfeed. Some felt embarrassed. Some just wanted their bodies back to themselves after,
sharing it for 9 months.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get it.
Some didn't want to be tied down. And some had issues with their partners or husbands not wanting them to breastfeed. And then there was, of course, like in others.
Yeah, another category.
It was funny because this same study also looked at if there was any difference between race and ethnicity as to people who breastfed versus who didn't, or the reasons why people chose not to breastfeed. And actually, there really wasn't any. It was interesting. So it doesn't really matter if you're Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It was pretty much a
Even across
hodgepodge,
the board.
there was
Yeah.
no like, oh, white women said this, black women said this, Asian women said this. No, when they accounted for like variability, it like all equaled out, which I found to be really interesting because you see a lot of this in healthcare.
Mhm.
And I wondered if,
It
African
existed in
American or
this.
American or Hispanic or
Yeah.
Asian, if any one group was more likely to breastfeed than the other. And the answer is no.
It's just personal preference.
I think one of the biggest things is the socioeconomic capacity because breastfeeding doesn't necessarily cost anything, but my time is worth something. So the time that you take to breastfeed, because unless you're pumping,
Well, even that takes time.
that takes time as well, but nobody else is really feeding your child.
Correct.
You are doing that. And so that does take time. It does take dedication. It does take a commitment.
It does.
There is ways around doing it. There are plenty of working moms who choose to breastfeed, and they breastfeed at home. They pump when they're at work. They make it work, but they still have to stop what they're doing, go into an office, shut the door, pump, and do all these things to make that happen.
Yeah, then you have to refrigerate or freeze. Yeah, it's time consuming.
It is. So I found that to be interesting to see the different dynamics as to why people chose not to do it.
So one of the reasons we chose this topic was because it's so pushed. It's so pressed from the moment that you hear that you're pregnant that you should breastfeed. And like we mentioned, some can, some can't. Sometimes it's personal choice.
Yeah, for like women who've had mastectomies, they can't. They physically can't.
Exactly. But then in the recent years with this movement of, breastfeeding and being allowed to breastfeed in public and not have to hide in the restroom anymore and do it. And, all these positive, progressive breastfeeding movements, there's also like this dark, shady side to it too, where people are shaming you
if you don't
breastfeed. Of course, breast is best. It does have a lot of benefits, but I kind of wanted to talk about that other side, the shaming side of it.
So I have 2 children, and I did not breastfeed either one of them. It was a choice. I did know, I was educated on the benefits of breastfeeding, and I even had somebody that had given me a breast pump for me to try to pump, and it was a whole thing. With my first child, I think I maybe breastfed for about 3 weeks when I was home, when I was first home. And I really did try as much as I could. However, I was working part-time, going to school full-time, and it was a lot. It was so stressful. And when you're trying to breastfeed, I felt though, like if I was home, that I needed to get her to latch and that I needed to try to like have that physical breastfeeding moment. And it didn't work. And then when I tried to pump, it was very, very painful. And I think I have a pretty high tolerance for pain. I don't really complain about pain a lot, It was just with both of my kids. I mean, I was 5 centimeters when I went to the hospital and got settled. By the time they checked me again, I was at 8, and they were like, "Oh, wow, you're doing really well." Like, so I get like the pain aspect. Like, I understand that sometimes you have to have that discomfort. It did make you cramp, but that was kind of the least of your problems, And I was just like, this is just not working. It really almost stressed me out to try to breastfeed. And so I was just like, no, I'm not doing it. And there were members of my family that were just like, oh my gosh, really? You're not going to do it? Like, that you should. That there are all these benefits. And I'm like, and I know that there's formula on the market that is safe. And guess what? I can put it in a bottle and I can hand her to somebody else and they can feed her. And she is well and has no problems and has a high IQ and is doing great.
Healthy, striving,
Fine.
surviving, all that stuff.
But I remember kind of feeling like, did I do something wrong? But by the time I think moved on a little bit, got more comfortable with myself, I was just like, whatever, it's fine. I didn't feel badly about it. And so when I went into my second pregnancy, I was just like, I'm not even going to try this. I'm not going to do it.
Well, you tried it once and it didn't work for you.
Right. But I remember the nurses and the students coming in and they're like, okay, they didn't ask, would you like to learn to breastfeed? Would
No,
you
it's like, come on, let's latch on.
Yes, it was very much, all right, here you go. Have them latch. Let's do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not breastfeeding. And they were just like, what? I mean, it was a look of stunned.
Yeah. Like, how dare you?
And I'm just like, no. And, they will look at my husband and my husband's like,
that's hers. Like, she could do what she wants.
Like, I'm not doing it. And I think sometimes he didn't even realize that they were like, hey, you're not going to breastfeed. Do you know this? Because I think he's in his own little world. And
most men are.
He's like, whatever. Healthy baby, that's all that matters. I mean, he was premature when they came out. The first thing they did wasn't latch him to me. The first thing they did was give him a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
Because his sugar was low. And that's fine. But if breast is best, then why did you stick a bottle in his mouth?
That's true.
Instead of saying, hey, mama, his sugar's low. I need you to see if he can latch on to see if we can get him something to get his sugar up.
That's true.
They didn't. They stuck a bottle in his mouth, came back to me and said, he drank an ounce before I could stop him. He's probably going to throw up everywhere.
He just came out hungry.
And he did not throw up, but that nurse is the reason he eats like a man. No, I'm just joking. It's fine. It's totally fine. Which, I mean, I do. I want them to do what's best. Mm-hmm. I mean, his sugar was low. He needed a supplement. That's fine. I'm not upset about that at all. Mm-mm. But my thought process, if breast is really the best, then how come your instinct reaction is to give a bottle versus getting him to latch on? Why? Because you know how much you're giving them and you can see what's going on and there's all these things. Well, I couldn't imagine being a type A personality and not knowing, because you're, these moms that like write everything down and weigh diapers to try to figure. Yeah. I'm not doing it.
No, I was never that. I mean, I think I'm probably type A. I think everybody who knows me probably knows that. I have a 5-year planner. Yep. I like things a certain way. I use a certain particular pen. Right. Like I am OCD. I admit it. Whatever. But not to the point where I'm writing down color, consistency, and amount of poop.
Right. But sorry. I mean, they're like, oh, we don't know how much he's eating. So we're just going to weigh their diapers to see what they're taking out and their poops and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm just not doing it. Are they growing? Are they getting bigger? Yes. Okay, great. So there was a lot more work involved in breastfeeding than there was bottle feeding. And with everything that else that I had going on, I didn't want my time at home spent, feeding him, pumping him or her, feeding, pumping, cleaning, changing the baby. And by the time you do all that, they're ready to eat again.
Yeah, that's true.
That's all you're doing. And that's fine if you're a stay-at-home mom with no other responsibilities. But if you're not, that becomes more and more and more difficult.
That's true.
And then you have to rely on the person that's caring for your child to make sure that they're keeping track of all this stuff so that if everything is working out. Mm-hmm. That's just, it wasn't for me.
I hear you. So I have 2 children and they're spaced out. Mm-hmm. I had my daughter when I was super young, super married, super in school, super working, like trying to do it all. She was also a preemie. She was like 4 pounds, 8 ounces. Mm-hmm. And of course, they try to push breastfeeding on you from day one. It was not for me. Maybe because I was too young. Maybe I can say like at that age, maybe I was just too selfish. Like it was my body. Like you had mentioned before, I had shared it with, this little person for 8 months and I want it back. On top of that, going to school, working, having a husband and, just everyday life situation happening. I didn't even try. I'll be honest, I didn't even try. I was like, you know what? My mom raised me with bottle. I don't think I came out bad. So I'm just going to raise my daughter with bottle. And
I was raised with a bottle as well.
Yeah. And I'm like, turned out perfectly fine. No big deal, right? No big deal. So when my son came along, like I said, there's quite a few years in between. That's all they pushed on you. Mm-hmm. But my circumstances and situations were different this time.
Completely different, right?
So, like, I was a stay-at-home mom.
Mhm.
I had time, daughter was in school, but he was born early.
Yeah.
He was born at 29 weeks. He was like 2 pounds, 14 ounces. He was in NICU for like 6 weeks. It's very important to have that skin to skin contact and touch.
Mhm.
In order for those hormones to produce breast milk.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I didn't really have that.
Right.
Because he was in NICU and
Right.
he had to be there. I remember having a speech therapist trying to have him latch on. It did not work. It would not work. I went home, and pumped every 2 hours on the dot, refrigerated, saved it up, would take it to the NICU so they could feed him with that. And then it just came a time where, because there was no contact at all and no latching at all, that I just wasn't producing enough.
Right.
And so then we started halving and halving, and then it got to a point where I wasn't producing any milk. So he had to go to straight bottle.
Mhm.
And I felt for a long time shamed. And I did feel like I failed. I failed like as a mother because he was born so early, even though it had nothing to do, his being born early was not my fault.
Right.
I had HELLP syndrome and preeclampsia and some other medical issues. But I felt like I failed. I was like, damn, I couldn't even carry him for 9 months, can't even breastfeed. Every doctor's appointment after, you get asked, is he bottled or breastfed? And then, you get that lecture as to why you're not breastfeeding.
Right.
And I just felt a certain kind of way about it. Like, you don't know my story. Like,
And that's my problem with so many women have reasons that they physically can't. They don't produce enough milk. They've had some type of surgical something done to where they can't.
mm-hmm.
They have some kind of disease process where they can't.
Mm-hmm.
They take medicines which
Mm-hmm.
would pass through breast milk, so they can't. So as a provider, you need to do your research before you walk in there, because how many times do parents hear, or mothers say, oh, you're not breastfeeding, why? Oh, you're not breastfeeding, why? Like, make that a line item in your chart and know before you walk in.
I agree.
And at that point, it's like, if I choose not to, and I tell you, yes, I understand the benefits and I understand that I don't want to do it, then that should be the end of the discussion.
I just think the last pregnancy, it was just hard all the way around because he was born so early. He was born in an area, I would say that, because I had to be transferred from one hospital that was in a really affluent area to a hospital that was not in a very affluent, prevalent area. And then, unfortunately, you add in the color of my skin, people start to make assumptions. Like, nurses would ask me, if I was on drugs, is that why you had your baby early? Amongst a bunch of other things.
Right.
I mean, I even remember leaving there with my son, because if you have a preemie, that they have to pass the car seat test and all this other stuff, and especially if they're in NICU and they've been having apneas and the whole 9 yards. I remember leaving from the hospital with my son, 5 pounds, and being told, if I don't show up for his hearing appointments, or if I don't show up for his vision appointments, that they would call Child Protective Services on me, because they had so many issues with premature babies being born because of mothers that were addicted.
Right.
And then those people would not take their child to these appointments.
Right. So now if this happens, then it's an automatic, no matter what your situation is, CPA will be called.
Yeah.
And I think they do that across the board now. If you don't follow up, it's a problem. And they follow up to make sure you followed up.
I just found the way that they told me compared to the lady whose baby was beside mine. My son was like 2 pounds, 14 ounces. Her baby had gestational diabetes. So here's this like 12 pounder.
Right.
But so the lecture she got was not the lecture that I got.
I don't understand. If you're a medical professional and you have a chart that's there and you know that you have access to the information and you're going to go and make assumptions. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are people of all colors who have kids that are addicted to something because they were on, some kind of drug while they were pregnant, and it's a bad situation. And there's a lady now that I know who this happened with her brother's girlfriend, and it was a bad situation, and Child Protective Services was called, and they had no idea. And sure enough, it was because the baby was born with drugs in its system and went through withdrawals, and they, I guess, thought that nobody was going to know. To me, there's a different way to handle things if you're handling something in a parent who's a drug addict versus somebody who just has a medical condition. I think the approach can be a little bit different.
I agree. And I guess I'm saying all of this because it's in every parenting magazine.
Oh, yeah.
About breastfeeding, about being shamed if you do breastfeed in public, because there is that shame as well.
Yes.
I'm not only talking about the shame of not breastfeeding, because there is that, but then even if you choose to breastfeed, you get shamed for that too.
Yeah, you're supposed to go hide in a closet. But yet it's natural and everybody should be doing it.
Yeah, and there's laws that say that you can breastfeed in public, that you don't have to hide in the restroom anymore. You don't,
which is so sad that we have to have a law that states it's okay for you to breastfeed.
Yes. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this episode, because kind of felt like either way, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if you breastfeed in public, somebody's going to say something. But then if you put a bottle in the baby's mouth, somebody's going to say something.
Right. And I think if you just choose to be respectful, no matter what the situation is, it'll be fine.
Absolutely. We can agree to disagree and be respectful about it.
You don't need to say anything about whether or not I chose to breastfeed or not. And I don't have to say anything about whether you choose to breastfeed at the dining room table or in the bathroom. Like, whatever's more comfortable for you. Like, people have like these little fancy cover-ups. Some people choose not to cover up. I mean,
I don't really care.
It doesn't really bother me. It's so funny because when I was doing research for this, my son, who is 10, he's like, what's breastfeeding? And my daughter starts laughing. She's older. And so like I'm explaining it to him and he's like, you make milk like a cow?
Oh, wow.
I'm like, dude, no, you did not.
He did. Bless him. But that
was his thought process.
Yeah, that's his thought process.
And I'm like, that's the whole purpose
connect it to
of breast.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of them.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh. I'm like, it's normal. It's just normal.
Bless his heart.
And he's just like, I didn't know that. And then he just walks away, He got his,
his answer.
Education for the day. But when he looked at me, he was like, you make milk like a cow? I said, no. Son, you do not compare women to cows.
Ever.
And he just laughs, because he's 10 and does not care. But ultimately, having these open conversations, I think, is what's going to make him in the future, if he sees that, and he's like, she's just feeding the baby.
Yeah, he's just going to shrug his shoulders and walk on instead of making an
he might
comment.
stare because
he's a guy.
He's a guy.
Yeah.
He's young.
Yeah.
We'll teach that lesson as we get there.
So yes, studies show that breast milk is best for babies. We as nurses and mothers know the guilt we carry when we try to do the best for our patients and our children. And then sometimes it doesn't always pan out or it doesn't work out. So you can imagine not physically being able to provide your child with what the world considers is the best for them. Why do we as a society feel the need to judge and shame others when not one parent is perfect? There is more than one way to provide nutrition for our babies. So let's motivate, encourage, and uplift. Being a parent is already a hard lifetime job.
Well said. And you can find our references on our website, thenursingpostpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and be sure to leave us your thoughts and comments. Thanks again for listening to The Nursing Post.